He's choosing the captain.
What if I told you that the worst nightmare in the history of seafaring did not happen on the raging ocean, but on solid ground? The story of the ship Batavia is not just a tale of a shipwreck, it is a chronicle of how quickly a civilized person loses their humanity. In 1629, the pride of the Dutch fleet, laden with silver and jewels, crashed into the coral reefs off the coast of Australia. Hundreds of survivors found themselves on tiny waterless islands, hoping for rescue and help from their captains. But instead of rescue, they faced a threat that was worse than hunger, thirst, and the scorching sun. Power on the islands was seized by a man who decided that the laws of God and man no longer applied there. A pharmacist by training and a heretic by conviction, he built his own empire on bones and fear. This is the story of how a group of soldiers, sailors, and ordinary passengers found themselves held hostage by a mad dictator in the middle of the ocean. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a handful of unarmed soldiers were able to resist an army of killers using only their wits and debris washed up by the sea. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the disaster began long before the ship struck the reefs? On board the magnificent galleon Batavia, the atmosphere was poisoned long before the ship reached the shores of Australia. In the cramped holds and cabins, discontent was brewing, fueled by the ambition and greed of a few individuals. Passengers and crew increasingly faced a lack of space, disease, and quarrels, which only intensified during the long voyage. On such a ship, any trifle could become a cause for conflict, and the long journey exacerbated emotions. Overcrowding, stuffiness, and constant humidity created ideal conditions for outbursts of rage and despair. In such conditions, there were always people ready to take advantage of the tension for their own benefit. The chief architect of the coming chaos was not the captain, nor even the expedition commander. It was Hieronymus Cornelis, a man with a dark past and a hypnotic influence on those around him. A former apothecary who had gone bankrupt and fled from the law, he was looking for a way to get rich quick and change his fate. Cornelis was a master of manipulation. His soft speech and confident gaze made him dangerous, for he knew how to find weaknesses in people. He understood that a long voyage created the ideal environment for those who wanted to disrupt the order. His own failures and bitterness made him particularly susceptible to the idea of seizing power, and the Batavia became an opportunity he was not going to miss. Cornelis quickly found common ground with the ship's captain, Ariane Jacobsoon, who hated his superior, Commander Francisco Pelsart. Together, they devised a plan to seize the ship that seemed insane in its audacity. Their goal was not simply to remove the command, but to hijack the ship and become pirates. This plan united their common fears and desires. The captain dreamed of freedom from the strict rules of the East India Company, while Cornelis dreamed of personal power and wealth. Each saw in the other a convenient ally who would help bring the plan to fruition. Their fantasies of easy prey and unlimited power obscured the reality of the danger lurking within their own ranks. The conspirators began recruiting supporters among the crew, promising them easy money and freedom from the strict discipline of the East India Company. They acted cautiously, gauging the mood of the sailors and selecting those who were prone to violence. Gradually, a secret army formed on the ship, ready to act at the first signal. Gossip, whispers, and secret meetings at night became part of life on the ship. Many sailors, tired of harsh service, listened with interest to promises of better days. Cornelis cleverly played on their fears and greed. Thus, in the cramped holds, a mutiny gradually took shape that could change the fate of all the passengers of the Batavia. To provoke conflict and find a reason for mutiny, Cornelis devised a cruel and cynical plan. A group of sailors attacked one of the noble passengers, humiliating her and smearing her with filth. The calculation was simple. Commander Pelsart would have to punish the culprits, which would cause a mutiny among the crew. This action was monstrous in its cold calculation. Cornelis understood that violence would cause a chain reaction. He hoped that fear and rage would mix and lead to open conflict, which he could steer in the right direction. His cruelty was a reflection of his inner darkness and willingness to go to any lengths to achieve his goal. However, Pelsart, despite his illness and weakness, showed restraint and did not immediately punish the attackers. This confused the conspirators and forced them to postpone their active actions. The tension on the ship grew with each passing day, turning the voyage into a waiting game for an inevitable explosion. The commander had the wisdom to understand that hasty punishment could push the sailors to mutiny. He watched, listened, and waited, hoping to maintain control. But with each passing day, the situation became more heated, and even the calmest people felt uneasy. The ship was like a powder keg, where a spark could ignite at any moment. None of the ordinary passengers had any idea that their fate had already been sealed by a group of greedy people. The ship was on course, but inside it, an invisible storm of human passions was raging. The gold and silver in the holds beckoned the conspirators, making them forget about morality and duty. Even innocent conversation seemed suspicious to those involved in the conspiracy. They lived in two realities, one for everyone, the other for the initiated. And the closer the ship got to Indonesia, the more impatient the conspirators became. The reward seemed so close that it was impossible to back down. Fate, however, had other plans, intervening in the most cruel way possible. Instead of a mutiny on the open sea, a test awaited them that no one was prepared for. A navigational error led the ship straight into a trap set by nature itself. In one night, a peaceful journey turned into chaos. Wind, fog, misunderstanding. Everything came together in an instant when the galleon crashed into the reefs. The creaking of wood, the cries of people, and the waves crashing against the hull plunged everyone into terror. The conspirators forgot about their plans. Now everyone was thinking about survival. Thoughts of piracy vanished in an instant, giving way to fear of the elements. When the power structure collapsed along with the ship's hull, all the old rules disappeared. People found themselves scattered across reefs and small islands, where only the most determined survived. In this chaos, Cornelis saw a new opportunity to build his tyranny where there was no captain, no company, and no law. I'm very interested to hear your opinion. Do you think the conspirators would have succeeded in seizing the ship if the shipwreck had not occurred? And what fate would have awaited the passengers in that case? Write about it in the comments. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the reliability of old ships? On the night of June 4, 1629, the Batavia was sailing at full speed under swollen sails, cutting through the waves of the Indian Ocean. The watchman noticed white foam on the horizon, but mistook it for the reflection of moonlight on the water. It was a fatal mistake that cost hundreds of lives and tons of lost gold. With a terrible crash that drowned out the sound of the wind, the wooden hull of the ship crashed into a coral reef. The impact was so powerful that it threw sleeping people out of their bunks, and the mast creaked and broke. Panic instantly gripped the ship, turning the organized crew into a crowd of frightened people. In the darkness, pierced by screams and the sound of water, no one could understand the real scale of the disaster. The holds began to fill with water rapidly, and hopes of refloating the ship faded with every passing minute. Commander Pelsart tried to take control of the situation, but the chaos was all-consuming. People rushed around the deck, trying to save at least some of their belongings, forgetting the most important thing, their own lives. Cannons were thrown overboard to lighten the ship, but the ocean held on tightly to its prey. Dawn revealed to the survivors a terrifying picture of their new, hopeless situation. The ship was firmly stuck on the reefs, surrounded by turbulent waters, with only tiny flat islands visible in the distance. These patches of land looked completely lifeless and uninhabitable. A hasty and disorderly evacuation began to these islands, which would later be called the graveyard of the Batavia, boats shuttled between the sinking ship and the shore, carrying people, provisions, and barrels of water. Every seat in a boat was worth its weight in gold, and the struggle to get on board was fierce. Many who tried to swim to shore on their own were crushed by sharp coral or drowned in the strong surf. The ocean around the wreckage was littered with debris, barrels, and bodies of the dead. Those who made it to land fell onto the sand in complete exhaustion, unaware that their trials were only just beginning. There was nothing on the islands. No trees to provide shade, no sources of fresh water, no edible plants. They were just piles of coral limestone exposed to the winds. The survivors found themselves trapped under the scorching sun, with only meager supplies of food. In the first days after the shipwreck, discipline was still maintained by the commander's remaining authority. People hoped that these were temporary difficulties and that help would soon arrive. But with each passing hour, thirst became more and more agonizing, undermining their sanity and willpower. Thus began one of the darkest dramas in the history of seafaring. The people had escaped the ocean, only to find themselves locked in a stone prison without water or food. Which do you think is worse, to die instantly in the waves or to die slowly of thirst on a deserted island? Guess how long it took for civilized people to start going crazy with thirst? The water supplies salvaged from the ship were negligible for the hundreds of people huddled on a patch of land. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning every day into torture, while the salty ocean around them only teased with its inaccessible moisture. After a few days, many could barely speak. Their lips were cracked, their skin was covered with a salt crust, and their thoughts became slow and painful. Thirst erased social differences. Passengers, sailors, and officers became equally exhausted people who could think only of water. The shadows of the sparse vegetation seemed like salvation, but even there was no coolness. Commander Pelsart understood that without finding a source of fresh water, they were all doomed to a painful death within a week. Exploration of the nearest islands yielded no results. There were only rocks, sand, and salty puddles everywhere. Despair began to grip the camp, and people's eyes turned to the horizon. Every evening, they listened to the sound of the surf, hoping to catch even a hint of the murmur of water. But instead, they heard only whispers of impending doom. People argued and offered crazy ideas, but no one could change the harsh reality. Without water, their days were numbered. A difficult but necessary decision was made to send an expedition to search for water on the mainland. Pelsart, along with Captain Jacobs and a group of sailors, boarded a small boat. They promised to return as soon as they found water, but many watched them leave with disbelief and fear. The boat moved away from the shore amid the cries and pleas of people who hoped that the commander would find salvation. But along with hope, emptiness settled in the camp. Now they were left without leadership, and the further the boat went, the quieter the camp became, as if people did not want to admit that their fate was in the hands of those who had sailed beyond the horizon. The boat's voyage turned into a separate epic of survival in the open ocean. They sailed along the coast of Australia, but the rugged cliffs and surf prevented them from landing and replenishing their supplies. Every attempt to approach the shore ended in failure, and hope faded with each passing day. The small boat was a toy in the hands of the elements. The wind would pick up and then die down, and the waves tossed the little vessel around like a twig. The people on board became as desperate as those who had remained on the islands. Thirst haunted them here too, making the journey not just dangerous but almost hopeless. In the camp on the island, the commander's absence was perceived as betrayal and desertion. Rumors spread from tent to tent, sowing panic and anger among the abandoned people. Without a firm hand in power, society began to break down into small groups, concerned only with their own survival. Meanwhile, Pelsart's boat, having found no water on the coast, made the desperate decision to sail to Batavia, the capital of the Dutch colonies. It was a journey of thousands of kilometers across the ocean in a rickety little boat. The chances of success were minimal, but it was the only way to bring help. For those who remained on the islands, this decision meant only one thing. In the coming weeks or months, they would have to survive without any guarantees. Even then, it was clear that only those who could adapt to the new rules, the rules of survival amid despair, would be able to survive. Water supplies on the islands were running low, and people began drinking seawater in their own urine. Disease and death became commonplace, and corpses were simply thrown into the water or lightly covered with sand. In this atmosphere of universal decay, the star of Hieronymus Cornelis began to rise. It was precisely the lack of control and hopelessness that became a breeding ground for people like him. The psyche of people broken by thirst became flexible and malleable. It was easier for them to follow a man who promised salvation than to accept the cruel truth of reality. He remained the senior officer on the islands and was formally responsible for maintaining order. But instead of organizing a fair distribution of resources, he began to make plans to seize power. Thirst and hunger became his allies, tools for subjugating the will of others. Cornelis was intelligent and eloquent, skilled at convincing people he was right. He began gathering the strongest and most unscrupulous sailors around him, promising them privileges. Water and food became the currency with which loyalty and life were bought. He used despair as a weapon, making people dependent on his decisions. Those who stood closer to him received crumbs of hope. Those who resisted faced threats. A new power was forming within the camp. Cruel, uncontrolled, and based not on law but on fear. The commander's departure gave free rein to those who had long dreamed of profit and power. The islands turned into a closed world where only the law of force prevailed. Please don't forget to like this story of a desperate search for salvation if you found it impressive. What if I told you that the most dangerous man on the island carried not a sword, but an apothecary's bag? Hieronymus Cornelis did not look like a typical villain or a cruel pirate. He was an educated, well-read man with gentle manners who could talk for hours about philosophy and religion. In the heart of this apothecary lived a dangerous heresy that denied sin and moral responsibility. He believed that a person who had known the truth was free from all restrictions and could do whatever he wanted. God, in his opinion, spoke through his desires, and his every action was sacred. After Pelsart's departure, Cornelis began to methodically seize power. He took control of the food and weapon stores, which immediately made everyone else dependent on him. Now only he decided who would eat and drink and who would starve to death. He created a loyal guard around himself from former conspirators and soldiers. These people gained access to the best food, wine, and most importantly, the right to violence. Cornelis dressed them in fancy outfits made from expensive red fabrics found in the ship's cargo. His reign began not with mass executions, but with cunning manipulation and deception. He convinced people that there were not enough supplies for everyone and that it was necessary to reduce the population for the sake of the survival of the chosen ones. This monstrous logic resonated with those who wanted to live at any cost. Cornelis masterfully played on the fears and weaknesses of his subordinates. He pitted people against each other, creating an atmosphere of total distrust and suspicion. No one could be sure that their tent mate would not report them or kill them in their sleep. He himself rarely got his hands dirty with blood, preferring to give orders to his henchmen. He watched the violence from the sidelines as if conducting a scientific experiment on human nature. His madness was quiet, intellectual, and therefore even more terrifying. The dictator declared himself Governor-General of the islands, demanding absolute obedience and worship. He appropriated all the gold and jewels, creating a grotesque semblance of a royal court among the coral reefs. In this theater of the absurd, human life was not worth a penny. People who had been respectable citizens just yesterday were turned into sadists and murderers under his influence. Cornelis freed them from their conscience, saying that there was no good or evil in this new world. It was an intoxicating feeling of permissiveness that corrupted souls faster than disease destroyed bodies. The apothecary's power seemed limitless, but he made one fatal mistake. Are you ready to find out what miscalculation this genius of evil made that cost him everything?
We will see the sunrise together. Listen closely. The wind is against us.
Cornelis understood that the greatest threat to his power was a group of soldiers loyal to their oath. These men, trained in discipline and weaponry, could organize resistance at any moment. So he devised a cunning plan to get rid of them without entering into open conflict. He summoned Corporal Vibby Hayes, the leader of the soldiers, and entrusted him with an important mission. Hayes and his men were to go to the neighboring high islands that could be seen on the horizon. The official task was to search for fresh water and send smoke signals in case of success. For Hayes, this seemed like a chance to prove himself and help his comrades. In reality, it was a death sentence disguised as an expedition. Cornelis was certain that there was no water or food on those islands, and that the soldiers would simply die of thirst there. He did not even give them weapons, leaving them defenseless against nature and possible enemies. The soldiers, unsuspecting, set off on their mission, taking only the minimum of equipment with them. They were dropped off on a rocky shore and left to fend for themselves. Cornelis breathed a sigh of relief, believing that the main threat to his regime had been eliminated forever. When the boat sailed away, the soldiers felt lonely, but they remained hopeful. They believed in discipline, in duty, and in the fact that their mission would help all the survivors. For them, it was not exile, but a task that had to be accomplished at any cost. However, fate once again laughed at people's plans. Hayes and his squad not only did not die, but also accomplished the impossible. Exploring the island, they discovered hidden crevices where rainwater had accumulated. This discovery was a turning point in the entire history of survival. The soldiers drank their fill and realized that this island was suitable for life. Moreover, they found colonies of seabirds and small wallabies there, which became an excellent source of food. Hayes, true to his duty, immediately ordered a signal fire to be lit to convey the good news to the others. 3 columns of smoke rose into the sky, visible from afar. It was the signal of rescue that had been so eagerly awaited on the main island. The soldiers were sure that Cornelis would now send a boat to them for water. They rejoiced at their discovery and thought of their return as a matter of time. It seemed to them that their merit would be recognized by all, for water meant life for every human being. But the reaction they had hoped for did not follow. No one came to them with barrels to collect the precious water. Hayes and his men looked at the sea in bewilderment, not understanding why their discovery was being ignored. And although they had no weapons, they had discipline, solidarity, and moral superiority. They knew that they were defending not only themselves, but also those who had fled from terror. Thus began the struggle that would turn Hayes and his men into the unexpected heroes of this terrible story. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how easily a person can become accustomed to killing? After the soldiers were removed, Cornelis began a systematic purge of the camp. His goal was not only to reduce the number of mouths to feed, but also to bind his supporters together with a blood oath. Murder became a kind of initiation ritual into his inner circle. The rebels acted under the cover of night or lured their victims away under false pretenses. People were told that they were being transferred to another island or sent fishing. No one ever saw them again, and asking questions was deadly dangerous. The methods of execution were varied and cruel in their ingenuity. Some were drowned, some were beaten with clubs, and some were stabbed with daggers. Cornelis demanded reports on the work done, keeping a terrifying account of the deaths. Fear became the main tool of control on the island. People were afraid to even whisper to each other, fearing denunciations. Everyone knew that any careless glance or word could result in a night visit from the executioners in red coats. However, even in this nightmare, there were people who tried to resist. Some secretly built rafts, hoping to reach Hayes Island. Others hid in crevices in the rocks, feeding on shellfish and hoping to survive the reign of terror. In just a few weeks of Cornwallis's rule, more than 100 people were killed. The reefs around the island became a mass grave for those who simply wanted to return home. The water in the lagoons was sometimes stained red, a reminder of the price of one man's insane ambitions. What do you think makes people obey a tyrant, even when they know they will be the next victims? While madness reigned on one island, a true brotherhood was born on another. V.B. Hayes, a simple soldier, proved to be a talented leader and strategist. Realizing that Cornwallis would come after them, he began to prepare for defense, having neither firearms nor professional tools. Hayes's first task was to organize the construction of fortifications. The soldiers used flat slabs of coral limestone, which were abundant on the island. They built walls using dry masonry, creating strong defensive structures capable of withstanding attack. This fortress, named Fort William Hayes, became the first European structure on Australian soil. The problem of the lack of weapons was solved with remarkable ingenuity. Soldiers found fragments of barrels washed up on the shore. They made spearheads from iron hoops, sharpening them on stones. Hayes established strict discipline and fair distribution of resources in the camp. Everyone, from the lowest sailor to the corporal, received equal rations of water and wallaby meat. This united the men and gave them a moral advantage over Cornwallis's gang. The defenders' morale was incredibly high. They knew they were fighting for a just cause, for their lives and for justice. Unlike the rebels who were driven by fear and greed, Hayes's soldiers were brothers in arms. They were ready to face the enemy. Sentinels stood on the walls of the coral fortress, scanning the horizon for boats with red flags. The battle for survival was entering its decisive phase. Cornwallis understood that the existence of an independent group of survivors undermined his authority. In addition, he desperately needed water, which was almost gone on his island. He decided to end Hayes's resistance once and for all by gathering his best forces for an attack. With each passing day, he felt the situation spiraling out of control. People were starting to ask questions, and rumors that the soldiers had found a source of water were causing envy and anger. Cornwallis saw that his power was based on fear, but that fear was waning. To maintain his influence, he needed to show strength and destroy those who dared to live without him. The rebels, armed with muskets and sabers, landed on the shore of High Island, confident of an easy victory. They laughed at the soldiers, who had only homemade pikes, but their laughter quickly turned to screams of horror. Hayes chose the perfect tactic. He did not wait for the enemy on the shore, but lured them onto uneven terrain strewn with sharp stones. Here, where it was impossible to maintain formation, the rebels lost their advantage. He understood perfectly well that their strength lay in their numbers and weapons, but only in open terrain. Once they were led into an area where every step could be their last, their advantage disappeared. Hayes had planned a route that forced the enemy to march in a line, losing their room for maneuver and becoming easy targets. When the enemies got close enough, Hayes's soldiers suddenly attacked from their hiding places. Long pikes proved more effective than sabers at a distance. The coordinated actions of the disciplined squad broke up the disorderly crowd of killers. The soldiers saw the enemies trying to raise their weapons, but they would not fire. They heard the rebels cursing as they fumbled helplessly with their gun locks. Every step backward turned into a panicked retreat. The victory was complete and incredibly important. It proved that discipline was stronger than chaos. The enraged dictator made several more attempts to storm the fortress, using cunning and bribery. He tried to lure the soldiers to his side by offering them gold and wine, but the loyalty of Hayes's men was as solid as the rocks of their island. Cornwallis understood that it would be difficult to win by brute force, so he decided to play on people's weaknesses. He spoke of the riches that could be theirs if they switched sides, but the soldiers, having seen the suffering of the fugitives, already knew the value of his words. No promises could make them betray the remaining peaceful people. In one of the battles, the soldiers managed to do the impossible. They captured Cornelis himself. Left without a leader, the gang descended into chaos, but still posed a deadly threat. Command was taken over by Wouterloos, an even more cruel and determined rebel soldier. He understood that they now had nothing to lose and prepared for a final, decisive assault. The final battle was the fiercest. The rebels used all their firearms, showering the defenders with lead. Hayes' soldiers held on with their last ounce of strength, repelling wave after wave. Every gunshot echoed over the rocks. Bullets ricocheted off the stones, knocking off bits of rock. Hayes' warriors felt their bodies covered in bruises from the blows of stones and ricocheting shells, but they did not retreat. The line of defense trembled but held. The forces were unequal, and it seemed that the fortress was about to fall. The rebels had endless ammunition, while the defenders' strength was dwindling. And at this critical moment, when the outcome of the battle hung in the balance, a sail appeared on the horizon. At first, no one believed their eyes. People decided it was an illusion caused by despair and fatigue. But the sail was getting closer and closer. It became clear that this was not a mirage. It was real salvation. It was not an illusion or a mirage. The rescue ship was approaching the islands, and with it came the return of hope that many had already lost. The appearance of the sail on the horizon instantly stopped the fighting. Both sides froze, realizing that this was the moment of truth. It was the Sardom, the rescue ship on which Commander Pelsart had returned. A frantic race to get there first began. Hayes understood that whoever reached the ship first and told their version of events would win. If the mutineers captured the ship, they would kill all the witnesses and become pirates, as they had planned. Vibe Hayes and several rowers jumped into a small boat and rowed with all their might. They risked their lives as they fought their way through the waves toward the commander's ship. The mutineers also launched a boat in an attempt to seize the initiative. When the mutineers' boat came alongside, they were met not with a friendly reception, but with the muzzles of cannons and armed sailors. The element of surprise was lost. The mutineers, dressed in their ridiculous red uniforms and laden with gold, looked pitiful in the face of regular forces. Pelsart demanded that they lay down their arms and surrender. Seeing their overwhelming superiority, the mutineers obeyed. They were put in chains, and Cornelisa's empire collapsed in an instant. The commander landed on the islands and was shocked by what he saw. He found dozens of fresh graves, traces of a massacre, and tortured survivors. Witness accounts painted a picture of such monstrous atrocities that it was difficult to believe. An investigation began. Pelsart questioned everyone, reconstructing the chronology of events. Cornelisa's diaries and the testimony of the survivors formed the basis for one of the most high-profile trials of the era. For Wibby Hayes and his soldiers, it was a moment of triumph. Not only had they survived, but they had also preserved their honor by protecting the innocent. The commander personally thanked the corporal, calling him a hero and savior. However, the joy of salvation was overshadowed by the severity of the losses. Of the more than 300 people who were on board the Batavia, less than a third survived, and most of them died not at sea, but at the hands of their own comrades.
Hear me. This mutiny stops today. Return to your duties.
Pelsart's investigation was swift and severe. It was too dangerous to take all the criminals to Batavia. There were too many of them, and they could start another mutiny on a small, overcrowded ship. It was decided to hold the trial right there, at the scene of the crime. Pelsart understood that any delay could lead to a new outbreak of violence. Fear of the mutineers still lingered on the islands, and it was necessary to show that the law was alive and capable of punishing even in the most remote corner of the globe. For the survivors, this trial was an act of restoring justice, the first step toward healing the horrific wounds of the past few weeks. The sentence was harsh in keeping with the spirit of the times. The main instigators, including Corneliso, had their hands cut off before being hanged, a symbol of the fact that they had raised them against their comrades and the authority of the company. It was terrible, but in the opinion of the judges, it was just retribution. Such punishment was intended to serve as a lesson not only to the mutineers, but to everyone who heard about this story in Batavia. The East India Company could not allow its authority to be undermined. The outward cruelty of the execution concealed the leadership's inner fear of a repeat of such tragedies. Some of the less guilty rebels were not executed, but left on the deserted shores of the mainland. 2 young men were dropped off on the coast of Australia with supplies. Their fate remains unknown, and they became the first European settlers on the continent, albeit involuntary ones. This decision reflected the spirit of the times. Mercy was a rare luxury, but sometimes judges preferred to give fate a chance at redemption rather than the executioner. Perhaps these young men lived long lives among the deserted shores. Perhaps they died shortly after landing. No one knows anymore, but their story became part of a vast, unexplored land. Wibby Hayes and his loyal soldiers were generously rewarded. Upon his return to Batavia, Hayes was promoted and became a national hero. His name went down in history as an example of courage and loyalty to duty. For ordinary people, he became a symbol that even in the most brutal circumstances, it is possible to preserve one's honor. His squad, which fought unarmed against an armed enemy, became legendary. Their exploits were admired by generations of sailors who set off on long voyages at the behest of the company. The story of the Batavia came as a shock to Dutch society. It showed the fragility of civilization and how quickly people can revert to a savage state. It was a lesson that the company remembered for a long time. Newspapers and reports discussed this tragedy at length. People who had never left their hometowns realized for the first time that even among the military and commercial elite, the darkest passions could flare up. The Batavia became a warning that civilization hangs by a surprisingly thin thread. Some of the Batavia's treasures were recovered from the bottom of the sea, but many valuables remained among the corals. They still attract adventurers and archaeologists. But the main legacy of the tragedy was not the gold coins, but the story itself. The story of the Batavia is a mirror that is frightening to look into. It shows us that the line between civilization and barbarism does not run along national borders, but through the heart of every human being. In extreme conditions, masks are discarded, and we see the true essence. We saw 2 paths: Cornelius's path of selfishness, power, and blood, and Hayes's path of solidarity, discipline, and protection of the weak. One led to destruction, the other to salvation. This choice faces people in any disaster, in any era. They defeated the storm and survived thirst, but the main battle was fought between themselves. And in this battle, the spirit of camaraderie and ingenuity, embodied in simple stone walls and homemade pikes, prevailed. How do you think you would have acted in Wibby Hayes' place? Would you have been able to remain human when madness reigned around you? Write to us and tell us what other historical survival stories you would like to see on our channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.